Xert is a complete training platform for cyclists and endurance athletes. In this video, we're going to answer some of the most common questions that we get from new users looking to get started. I'm Scott Steele.
And I'm Armando Mastracci.
And this is Xert New User Tech Support. My writing partners keep talking about breakthroughs. What's a breakthrough? So this question is getting at another core feature of Xert. A breakthrough is when you ride hard and you push yourself to the limit, beyond what your current fitness says you're capable of. Xert uses something called MPA, or maximum power available, to track how close you are to your limit during a ride. If your power output goes above your MPA, generally for at least 5 seconds, that's a breakthrough. It means that one part of your fitness signature, made up of your threshold power, high intensity energy, and peak power, have improved. A bronze breakthrough is awarded when one of those three improve, a silver when two of them increase, and you'll be awarded a gold breakthrough when all three parts of your fitness signature increase. If you look at your progression chart, you might see a bunch of little circles scattered on it. Each of those circles is the software updating your fitness signature based on hard efforts in that activity. It's like validating your FTP with a test, but without ever having to do a formal FTP test. And Xert does this for all three aspects of your fitness, not just for FTP. So to recap, a breakthrough is when you ride hard, you push yourself to the limit, and Xert updates your fitness signature based on that hard effort.
Okay, here's a good question. Is Xert's threshold power the same as my FTP? That's a great question. And we get that all the time. Now, for all intents and purposes, you could use them interchangeably. Your FTP and your threshold power are essentially the same, probably going to be pretty close. But we don't use the word FTP because we don't establish it the same way that you may have established FTP in the past, where you've done a 20-minute test or you might do a ramp test and things like that. It's not your 1 hour power. In Xert, your threshold power represents the intensity at which you start to get fatigued. So above threshold, you'll see your MPA and your fatigue lines start to come down. And then below threshold, it recovers. Different thing altogether. It just so happens to be the same value in many cases. So keep that in mind, right? So Xert's threshold power isn't FTP, but for all intents and purposes, they're the same.
I don't have a Garmin device. Do I need to buy one to use Xert? I think this is maybe one of the bigger misconceptions about Xert. No, you don't need a Garmin to use Xert. We have created some pretty cool features for Garmin using the Connect IQ store, such as our Magic Buckets data field, but most of Xert's features are available without a Garmin. And in fact, we have many athletes that are using a Wahoo or Hammerhead, or just use the Xert EBC app on their smartphone, which works as a bike computer. If you train mostly indoors, the EBC app for Android or iOS also pairs to your trainer and lets you run Xert smart workouts. Xert also integrates with apps like Zwift, Ruvi, and Strava, to name a few. So if you use those apps, you can pull your activities into Xert. So the bottom line is there are some cool features for Garmin if that's the route that you want to go, but most of Xert's features are available without one.
Okay, let's see here. Where do I set my training zones? Well, that's an easy question. You don't. In Xert, we don't use training zones. We look at training zones as being kind of old school. We kind of moved on from using them. Instead, we use a fitness signature, which can more precisely identify how you need to train and what intensities you need to train at. So to answer that question, don't worry about it. You don't need to set training zones in Xert.
I've seen some cool charts and summaries from Xert on my friend's Strava rides. How do I get those for my activities? Yes, the training reports. Xert generates these automatically when your rides are synced from Xert to Strava. So if you're using the Xert EBC app, this will happen automatically. If you're using a Garmin or a Hammerhead or a Zwift, for example, be sure those apps are not auto-syncing to Strava. Let the ride come to Xert first, and then Xert will forward it to Strava with your training stats. There's a couple different reports based on what you did. There's a breakthrough report for when you get a breakthrough. There's a workout report if you do a structured workout with the EBC app. And there's also a forecast AI report if you're following a forecast AI training plan. In addition to the visual report, there's also a neat little text summary that includes things like XSS, your estimated fat and carbs burned, and more.
Okay, I've just registered for the trial and I feel a bit overwhelmed. Seems like there's a lot to learn. How do I use Xert without having to spend hours learning it? Well, first thing you'll realize is that there's a lot in terms of features that Xert provides. So it's a pretty broad platform, and you don't need to learn every aspect of the system when you first start using it. So that's the first thing. There are certainly new concepts that we bring. We sort of moved on from the traditional kind of FDP and percent and zones like that. So we're not using the same concepts. We're using new concepts. And the reason why we introduce new concepts is we think that's essential for athletes to get a better picture of what they need to do to improve. So there's new concepts, but the concepts are there not because you need to learn Xert, because it's a better expression of you, and you get to understand what you're capable of with the new concepts that we introduce. So to answer that question, there's certainly a lot of elements to the system, but when you first start learning it, ensure that you're understanding the basic concepts. So spend some time understanding what a fitness signature is, spend some time understanding what MPA means, look at what your training status means. These are kind of core essential pieces. Once you understand those, I think a lot of the rest of the system will make a lot more sense.
I also run a few times a week. How can I monitor my running with Xert? Good question. Let me clarify this because there's a couple ways that you can approach it. First of all, if you want all of the detailed analytics, so you want a running fitness signature, then you'll need to be using a running power meter, like a Stride, for example. From there, you can upload those runs with power data to a separate dedicated running profile, and Xert will create a running fitness signature and track everything there, separate from your cycling data. Now, if you're running mostly for fun or for cross training, then option 2 is to simply wear a heart rate monitor and allow Xert's heart rate derived metrics, or HRDM feature, to estimate the training strain and training load from your runs as part of your cycling training load.
Okay, here's a question I'm sure many of you will appreciate. I hate doing FTP tests. I always mess them up. Please help me. Well, you're not the only one. I think everyone that's ever done an FTP test will think it's, just a lot of suffering and just really uncomfortable. Well, that's just normal. The FTP testing or any kind of testing is really to push you to your limit, to find out where that limit is. And so they're always going to be really difficult to complete. You can pace them incorrectly. You can start out too hard. You can go out too easy. You might, stop pedaling somewhere in the middle, whether it's a 20-minute test or a ramp test or what have you, they're always really challenging to get right. And most of the time when you get them wrong, you end up with an FTP that might be a little bit too low, in which case, your training might not be exactly right. You might be under training. With Xert, you don't need to test. In fact, if you take a test that you messed up, for example, and you say, oh, okay, I went too easy, and then, you ramped it up at the very end, and maybe you only did it for, 18 minutes. Xert's going to figure that out, believe it or not. So you can upload any kind of test, whether it's 20 minutes or 18 minutes or 15 minutes. You could stop in between and, go harder, go easier. So long as you go to your limit, as long as you push yourself right to the limit, then you're just going to be fine. Okay, so the Xert's going to figure all that stuff out. That's one of the things that it does uniquely. No other system is really capable of doing that. So you feel free to kind of do your own kind of test. You don't even have to test. You can just sort of ride. And if you ride and you push yourself to your limit, that's equivalent to an FDP test with an Xert. And the other thing to keep in mind is that we're not just testing for your FDP. We're testing for your entire power profile. So that's your peak power, high intensity energy, and your threshold power. So it's a little more all encompassing when it comes to your fitness and not just looking for your FTP. So to answer that question, yeah, the best part of Xert is that you don't have to do a test. You can't really mess up any testing, and it's really a lot easier to follow and get your FTP correct.
Okay, here's one. I think a lot of people will be interested in this one. I get that threshold power is basically FTP and peak power is my sprint power, but what is HIE? Yeah, so I think this is a good question for someone that's maybe new to training with power, or if you're coming to Xert from another platform that only focused on FTP. HIE stands for high intensity energy, and it basically tells us how good you are at producing power over your threshold power. If you have a larger HIE, then you're able to push harder and last longer than an athlete with a smaller HIE. Xert uses your HIE to help set your training targets, track your progress, and help prepare you for races and events where big efforts above your FTP really matter. And that's it. So think of HIE as your capacity to ride hard. Sometimes Xert shows me as red, sometimes yellow. What's the difference? Well, I would assume that you're referring maybe to the color of the stars in your profile, or maybe to the colors that you see in the fitness planner. Either way, those correspond to your training status, and it's how Xert interprets your form data and assesses your readiness to train. Red corresponds to very tired status, and it usually means that you've done a lot more recently than what your body is used to, so Xert will recommend recovery. On the other hand, yellow means that your high-intensity systems are tired, but that your low-intensity system is still okay to train. So if you do train, keep it light and endurance-paced, kind of like a zone 2 day, if you will. There's also green and blue status, which corresponds to fresh, and on those days, you're cleared to smash a hard workout or join a hard group ride, for example. These colors are based on your recent activity data compared to what you usually do, and they might not perfectly correspond with how you feel in the moment. It simply Xert's way of helping you train smarter, avoid overtraining, and back off and recover when needed.
Okay, here's a question we're getting a lot more often. What's the difference between a standard workout, a smart workout, and using magic buckets? Well, standard workout is what you typically see on pretty much every platform out there. It's going to have your intensity intervals. It's going to have your recovery intervals. You're going to have repetition and sets. Intervals, power is going to be set at a certain level. Recoveries are going to be set. So everything's predefined before you even start the workout. When it comes to smart workouts or smart intervals, there's something we developed many years ago. What they are are intervals that will self-adjust in order to get you to reach a certain fatigue level. Okay, so if for example, if you go out too hard on an interval, you might find that the power might decrease, okay, or the duration might decrease, depending upon if it's a dynamic power or dynamic duration interval. So lots of really cool workouts. The thing about the smart workouts is you need to use our workout player in order to do that. So you can't use our smart workouts on kind of your typical platforms because they don't do that. They don't know how to dynamically change power or duration. So you have to use one of our players, our workout players, to take advantage of that. Now, recently we came out with magic buckets. And magic buckets are really cool. Again, you need to use our magic buckets, data field or app to be able to use them. But they will completely develop the workout on the fly as you're doing it. Okay, now it has some preset levels. So your kind of your intensities that you're going to target and the amount of strain you want to accumulate during the workout. But it will automatically adjust the intensity, the durations, your recovery intensities. All those get recomputed on the fly as you do it. Okay, so you can decide you want to do it hard and get it done with really soon. It'll take care of that. Sometimes you may not feel like really going too hard and you want to go easier. Well, you can take it easy and it'll lengthen it a little bit longer, but it'll still get you to kind of finish the workout. So the workout duration, the interval duration, the interval targets, all set on the fly. Okay, so that's the big difference. Okay, so to answer that question, your standard workout is going to be really simple, just standard, simple patterns, up and down. Smart workouts, smart intervals are going to be both, or could have either dynamic power or dynamic duration intervals. And magic buckets is a completely different way to train, where the interval durations, the intensities are recomputed on the fly as you complete the workout.
Okay, here's a really important question. What is MPA and why is it so cool? MPA stands for Maximum Power Available, and it's one of the most fundamental features of Xert. In my opinion, it's also one of the coolest features and something that really sets Xert apart. MPA represents the most power you could produce at any moment in time. When you're fresh or you just start an activity, it's equal to your max sprint power. But as you fatigue, it declines. The harder you push or the longer you hold a hard effort, the further it drops. What I want to emphasize here is that MPA isn't just a number. It's representing a physical limitation. If you've ever pushed yourself to the limit chasing a Strava segment, or pushing hard up a short punchy climb, or if you've been dropped during a group ride or dropped during a race, you've experienced the sensation of being limited by your MPA. No matter how hard you wanted to hold that wheel or how hard you wanted to push those last 15 seconds for the KOM, you just couldn't push the cranks any further. That's what MPA is. Now, Xert is the first and the only software that tracks this value and even shows it to you second by second in real time. We also have smart workouts with intervals designed to deplete or recover your MPA a certain amount. And if you're ever free riding and your power surpasses your MPA, Xert detects this as a breakthrough, meaning that your fitness has improved. So why is MPA so cool? Well, it helps us better understand fatigue and recovery during your ride. It helps us train smarter, and it helps detect increases in your fitness without needing to do FTP tests. Okay, here's another one. Do I need a power meter to use Xert, or can I still track progress with just a heart rate monitor? Well, to get the most out of Xert, yes, you'll need to use a power meter. This could be power meter pedals or a crank on one of your bikes, or it could be power measured from an indoor smart bike or a smart trainer. And this is because Xert creates your fitness signature and detects fitness breakthroughs using power data. It's something that heart rate on its own can't do. And in my opinion, a power meter is one of the best investments you can make if you're looking to take your cycling fitness to the next level. Now, that being said, I also understand that people don't have a power meter for all of their N+1 bikes. So if you have a commuter bike or a mountain or gravel bike that doesn't have a power meter, record those activities with a heart rate monitor. And in Xert, you can enable heart rate derived metrics, or HRDM. And Xert will use your heart rate to estimate the training strain of those activities. And the estimate gets even better if you can also include a cadence sensor for those rides. It's not as accurate as having power data, but it's a great way to ensure that all of those activities still count towards your progress in Xert. So to recap, you'll get the best experience with Xert when using a power meter, but for bikes or activities where you don't have one available, just record it with a heart rate monitor, and Xert's HRDM can still count the progress from it.
Okay, after setting up my account, my FTP from Xert seems completely wrong. What happened? Do I need to load more data? When you first load your data in Xert, it will look to establish what your fitness is as of today. Now, in order to do that, it needs to have expressions of your fitness within the data that you've loaded. So let's say you've loaded the last 3 months worth of data as part of the trial. It would need to see that you've gone and pushed yourself to your limit at some point within the last 3 months. So if you haven't done that, obviously, then the system may not be able to establish what your fitness signature is. Sometimes it just might be you're not pushing your peak power. You haven't gone for a maximum sprint effort, so the system doesn't really know where your peak power is, for example. That can actually cause other problems, and so that would be something that we want to look at. The other thing that can happen is you might have errors in your data. So not all power meters are accurate all the time. Sometimes you have conflicts between your trainer power and your power meter on your bike, for example, and this might create discrepancies in your fitness signature and things like that. So you'd want to make sure that your data quality is good. So those are really the two main things that I would look at. You can certainly load more data, and that would help in some cases. In some cases where you have errors, and then loading more data isn't really going to resolve the issue. You have to remove those errors. To answer that question, ensure they have good quality data. Look for errors in your data, remove them. Ensure you have good maximal efforts with your data. And if you're still unable to kind of figure out what's wrong, the best thing you can do is simply contact support.
How do I choose the right athlete type for me? Yes, this is another good question. In Xert, athlete types help tailor your training to the types of efforts that you'd like to improve upon, especially those above your threshold power. And I want you to think about it this way. If you're riding and racing in ways that push you above your threshold power, then training your FTP alone isn't sufficient. You're neglecting other aspects of your fitness. And that's where athlete types come in. So to choose one, start by thinking about the type of riding and racing that you'd like to improve upon. So do your favorite rides and races have lots of high power, short bursts? If so, then you're probably best selecting puncheur or breakaway specialist or rolleur. If your rides have maybe longer climbs or long steady efforts above threshold, select something like GC specialist or climber. A quick way to tell is to look at some of your past activities in Xert. Do they have lots of yellow, orange, and red spikes? Those are high and peak efforts, so you'd want to choose an athlete type that will help train those systems. Now, I know every cyclist wants to increase their FTP so they can brag about it on the group ride, but I want to assure you that no matter which athlete type in Xert you pick, Xert will help you increase your threshold power. The different athlete type options will simply help Xert improve other aspects of your fitness as well, such as your ability to sprint or to attack. And no worries, you can always change your athlete type later if your goals change or as your goals evolve over time. So don't worry about being locked into one athlete type. I just subscribed and I want to load more data. How can I sync more? I think this is pretty common. I think a lot of athletes, once they understand how we see things at Xert and they understand MPA, they're really curious and they want to see how their past seasons or their past races look like analyzed through Xert's lens. So the easiest way to do this is through Strava. From the Sync Strava page, you can use the custom activity date picker and you can sync back to 3 years of activity data. You can also upload files manually if you have them saved somewhere like your computer or maybe Dropbox. Now, once Xert imports those activities, it's going to recalculate everything, starting from that very first activity, and it's going to look for new breakthroughs along the way. So you might see your numbers change a little bit. This is totally normal. It's all part of the system analyzing your entire activity history. If you see some unexplained changes, like your threshold power is suddenly 100 watts higher, that usually indicates that there's some errors in your data somewhere. So you can look for large unexplained breakthroughs and delete those activities, or you can send us a note to our support team and we'd be happy to help you get it sorted. That's all the questions that we have time for today. Thank you for watching the Xert New User Tech Support video. If you found the video helpful, useful, or interesting, be sure to like it and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on any future videos. Got any questions that you'd like to see answered in the future? Drop them in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. That's all for today. We'll see you next time.